Murray, and I'm one of the Assistant Dean of Students at Florida Atlantic University in Boca Raton, Florida. I'm a latecomer to the game of orientation and transfer services. I've been in higher ed, oh goodness, almost 30 years. I know I don't look that old. Let me believe that. But unfortunately, I think I am starting to look that old. But I've been in higher ed for 30 years and had a vice president who was looking for somebody who had a lot of higher ed experience and could use their skills and transfer them into working in enrollment management and orientation. So I've only been doing the orientation gig now for about 3 years, and most closely aligned with transfer services for about 2 years. But I think we've done a lot of neat things in the first few years that we've been at this. And I'm with my wonderful staff member, Iannelli.
So, good morning, I'm Dani. I am the Transfer Student Services Coordinator at Florida Atlantic University. I've been in this role now for about a year and a half, but I have been working with transfer students ultimately since I transferred as a student. So I was fortunate that a lot of my experience as an undergrad in orientation allowed me to work pretty heavily with transfer students, and then I had the fortunate opportunity to also work with UNG through my graduate program when I was here in Georgia. So I've been in the field for a little while, so I love being back here at the conference, so I'm really glad that you all are here. Before we start, I do want to say if you ever have any questions during this session, please do just feel free to ask us. We're pretty informal and casual when it comes to presenting in that way. But also know, since we are being recorded, if we have to repeat your question, that's why we're repeating it so that they can hear as well. So we're going to go ahead and get started.
So just wanted to find out a little bit about you folks. How many folks do have a transfer center on campus? Okay, great. So almost half the group. How many folks you're kind of it? You're the sole one? Okay. The other half of the group. Okay. What about public institutions, like 4-year public institutions, 2-year public institutions? Any private institutions? Okay, a few private. Okay. Anything unique about any of your institutions that, like, when people ask the questions and you're like, I just don't fit into any of those categories? No, we all kind of fit somewhere into that puzzle. Okay. Yes?
I kind of. I represent a 4-year institution and a 2-year institution. So I'm technically a 4-year person in a 2-year college.
Oh, okay. So part of a partnership?
Yes.
Okay, super. Okay, thank you. So she's working over at the 2-year institution, but you're actually a staff member of the 4-year institution.
Correct.
Okay. Is there anybody else that is in a similar role to that? Okay. I know we have some folks on our campus that spend time. They don't spend their whole day there. Okay. So Dani's going to go ahead and share with you the learning outcomes for today, because we want to make sure that we deliver, because it's a big part of our model.
So what we're going to focus on quite heavily today is talking through some strategies to implement a cross-divisional transfer center. And we'll talk about that a little bit later in the presentation, but we want you all to have some strategies in place if that's something you're hoping to do or hoping to implement. And then the second part of it is really going to hone in on that theoretically based and data-driven results ultimately. This presentation is going to focus on how we use one specific theoretical model to really create this streamlined onboarding and enrollment management process. We'll mention a few others, so do know that we do integrate a handful, but this is going to be the dominant one that we'll talk about today. And then lastly, we want you all to just understand how our appreciative enrollment model works. We're going to do our best to cover everything in this time frame, so just know that if we aren't able to get through everything, we'll hang behind and answer any questions to make sure that you do understand the whole process.
So we are huge fans of the Appreciative Advising model. Came out of Appreciative Inquiry. And anybody familiar with Dr. Jenny Bloom? Okay, some folks are familiar with her. Actually, I'm fortunate. My husband, Joe, he is on her faculty for the Appreciative Advising Institute. I recently joined it, but Joe's been on it from the inception. And something we're really proud of, when my husband started FAU, he started spreading the Appreciative Advising model throughout the advising, because that's his area, and into other units throughout the university. And when Dr. Bloom decided to leave University of South Carolina for her next step in her career, she picked FAU, which nobody thought she'd come all the way down to Boca Raton to regional campus, Florida Atlantic University, but she saw that that was the place she thought her work could grow because of the groundwork that had been done and how receptive our institution had been to the model of appreciative advising. So we wanted to be among the first to take that model and adapt it to our orientation and to the way we run our office. So I just quickly want to share with you the model. So, the definition is, and I think this is like what my contract is with the students. It's our very institutional way as an institution of helping you do what you're supposed to do, get on and you achieve your potential. And we do it as a collaborative process, and it's about open-ended questioning, open-ended experiences that help students identify what their dreams and their goals and their strengths, and how do they take those strengths and apply that to their plan of action and to ultimately reach their fullest potential. And so it's a 6-step process. You kind of come in and out of it. It's not necessarily linear, but the first place to start is always with the disarm. And disarm is about that first impression, making that first impression from the get-go, and that students feel welcome and they feel safe and they feel like you're a place that they want to be and that they belong. I tried to get around the room briefly, but a part of disarming, instead of just standing up here, I actually went in the back and I was trying to greet people and welcome them to role model some of that disarming. It's not the easiest thing to do sometimes when you're doing that face-to-face, like even today, but you got to just remember it's from the get-go. You got to start disarming. So we'll talk a little bit about how we do it with students, but mostly you can see how we use it as a framework for all of our work. So disarm, discover. When you're talking about students, it's in that advising role, whether it's an academic advisor, a student organization advisor, that way that we ask questions and we help open-ended questions and help students tell their story. And then from their story, you help them identify what their strengths are and what were their past experiences that they did well in and how will they build on that. So that discovery process. We flip discovery sometimes. That's the truest sense of the discovery word, the discovery phase. We also use it when we're saying we want them to discover about the university, things that they want to discover about their peers. But it's really an internal process, but we adapt it for external when we need it to be. So then dream. Everybody's got to have a dream. The dreams are what turn into the goals. So we work with our students to help them identify what is their dream. If there were no barriers, what is the dream? I tell the students at orientation that in the American Indian culture, there's the laws of nature, and in one of the nations, the fourth law of nature is that change can't happen unless it's preceded by a vision. You just can't have change unless there's a vision, and that's why they send young people on vision quests. So we work really hard in our orientation process and our individual meetings to help students identify what are those dreams and work to get them to say them out loud, because when you say them out loud, that's when they start to become real. And so then our design. So you got to have an action plan. You got to have the right people to help you. So that's the design. What's the plan? And then how are you going to deliver on it? And then we've introduced to them the personnel and the support folks at the university who are going to be with them when they hit challenges, because we know there's going to be challenges and we know there's going to be hurdles, but they don't have to go it alone and they shouldn't go it alone. And so that delivery piece. And then the don't settle. Set the bar high. How do you hold yourself accountable? How do you assess what you're doing, whether you're a student or an organization? So that's an overview of the model, and we'll fall back to this throughout the presentation.
And I do just want to quickly mention a few of the other theories that we are using. So we do also use, obviously, transition theory. I'm biased, it's my favorite theory. But we, in addition to that, we do use Handel's recommendations to help students transfer into a new institution. So throughout this, I'll mention where those recommendations really fit in with each of our processes and how we're accomplishing those. You'll kind of see it just through what we're talking about. And then in addition, we talk through environmental theory quite often, especially with that disarm stage. How are we using the entire environment, not just our office, but the university, to make sure these students are feeling welcome. And then lastly, we do talk about challenge and support. Sanford is one of those ones. I think it's a backbone for almost everyone in this room. So we do mention that one, and we use it in our office as well.
I always tell the team that when we talk about this theory, college is challenging enough. Our role is to support. We don't have to put challenges up in front of them. And when you start breaking down your enrollment processes for transfer students, there's way too many challenges and not enough support often.
So we're going to talk through how we support them. And so before we jump into the nitty-gritty, we do want to give you just a quick disarm of our institution and who we are. So if you don't know much about Florida Atlantic University, this is kind of our quick review, but we are a Hispanic serving institution, and we're a 4-year public research institution with a heavy focus on that research. We do indeed have graduate programs, and then in addition to that, there's actually 6 campuses that we have throughout the coast of South Florida. And what's really interesting about that is because we have these different campuses, students get to hone in on their specific majors. For example, we have a campus that's located right on the water, so students who are interested in ocean engineering and marine biology are doing that work in their degree, and so it's a really great opportunity for students. And then, probably one of the most important reasons we're here today, our campus is 30,000 students, but 50% of those students are transfer students, and that's been a constant for quite a long time. And so we're talking, in this presentation, we're talking about those 15,000 students. And so this is just to give you an idea of what our campus is.
So Florida Atlantic was established in the state system as a transfer-in institution. You would do your first 2 years at what was then community colleges, or now state colleges, and you would finish at FAU for the end of your program. I'd say about a quarter of a century ago, they decided to get into the business of having first-year students. And somewhere along the way, and this was before I was a part of the institution, I've only been there since 2014, they kind of lost their way on what was their bread and butter, like the transfer students. The emphasis went to the first year, and the processes just were not clear or transparent for the transferring student in. And so the provost started hearing from folks that, guess what, they're not coming to FAU because you're too hard to get into. And it wasn't necessarily about the academic rigor of too hard to get into. It was that just navigating that onboarding process, and that's, we refer to, do others use the term onboarding? Okay, that's a term that we use frequently of that process of getting the student recruited all the way through getting them registered for courses, so getting immunizations taken care of, all those processes, and we'll go over those more. So that's our definition of onboarding, and we know that's not language students use, so we try not to talk about onboarding too much to them until we explain it to them. So he's hearing, hey, they're going down the street to other institutions, and we got to do something here. So we have a very dynamic president right now, President John Kelly. He was originally at Clemson, and he has like unbridled ambition is his thing, and be bold, be daring, and just whatever it takes. It went from being an institution that was very slow to change, let everybody do it first, and then FAU will try it, to out of the gate, get it done, whatever it takes to get it done. And then we have this vice president, Dr. Corey King. I don't know if any of you have encountered Dr. King at NASPA. Did I see a head nod? I thought I did. He is very dynamic, and he stepped up and said, what can student affairs do? We've got resources, human resources. We've got some, he's kind of careful on how much he says on the monetary resources, but we have resources. What can we do? So he tasked me with taking a cross-sector group of folks up to visit our peers up at University of Central Florida, and very grateful to them because they opened their doors up and they said, here's what we do. And they taught us about all the things from pre-admission advising that we hadn't been doing in a coordinated manner on our campus, just like by the book, what it ought to look like. And so we came back and he said, here's what I can do. We'll hire a person. We'll put a person in that role and see what we can do. So we put the person in the role, and that course started, you put up a sign, it demonstrated, hey, you build it and they will come. And so then the provost and other leadership said, we need a place. We need somewhere where it's identifiable. So I have to be grateful to the folks at USC Berkeley, because I'll be honest, we were building to this, and the conversation happened so quickly from what are we going to do, let's build a center. I went to your website, beautiful website. I looked at the model and I said, here's the model. I went to the next meeting just ready to reference something, and the dean of undergraduate studies said, I still don't understand what we'll do with this center. And I pulled up all the stuff I recycled off your website and put my name on. I said, here's what we'll do. And in that instant, they said, go get your center. Here's the space. So I'm very indebted to the USC folks on that one. So they said, here's your space. Here's your center. We started getting folks together, did a resource assessment of what do we have, what are we doing well, and then where are those gaps. And we started identifying things like, you know, it would be really great if the transfer students had a tuition deposit, a nominal tuition deposit like the first-year students do, because then we could hone our resources, because we were spreading our resources so thin over, you know, 12,000 applicants and not being able to serve the ones that are truly, you know, making that decision to come. So that was one of the very first policies we implemented, was a tuition deposit, and we've seen great strides in getting students better service because we know where to put those resources. So that's one of the examples of what we had added. Let's just see something else. Oh, we didn't have a web presence. That was a resource. It was like all scattered across different people's web pages. And so when we did this resource assessment, we found out some really powerful things that we needed to address. So dream, we've got this dream now that we're going to have the center, and we had to start building it. And one of my favorite quotes to say to the students at orientation is one of Maya Angelou's, one solitary fantasy can change a multitude of realities. And I love that this dream of having this transfer center, I mean, we can already see the realities that we are affecting by these transfer students as they're coming through the door better prepared to start their classes because we've done a better job of setting them up. Oh, am I still next? Yep. Sorry, I didn't flip. So design. So this is what's really interesting. Our center is truly a partnership between academic affairs and student affairs. People look at it like, how do you do that? Like, how are you doing it? We have the right leadership for the right time, but we have staff, and I'll talk more specifically about the team in a moment, but in this team that I oversee, there's really only one direct report to me. The other folks work with me because we work together. But our design of how we're going to do this wonderful work for students that we want to do is we have this partnership. We have the center. I'll go into a little bit more detail about the center staff in just a moment. They have a very coordinated team effort of the way they work together, the way they service students together. And we are the team that has been hired to on the daily basis, get up and think about transfer students. Like the other people, this is how I describe, everybody else on the campus glances over ever so often and remembers that, oh, that policy affects transfer students. But we're the ones who are in there day in, day out. We notice the problems that are in the system, and because we've built this transfer task force, we are able to notice those things and get them to the top right away. So if there is something wonky in the system, we can get action on it very quickly because on our task force, we have assistant provost and associate provost on the task force. We have an assistant vice president on the task force, and we meet every other week. Been doing this now for 1.5 years, and it's amazing when you've got the right people at the table how quickly change can happen. We noticed that we had students getting backed up with 90+ credit hours getting admitted, and what had happened, the colleges had stepped in where our advising is, and they had tried to take over the process of admitting those people, whether or not they were going to let them into their program with 90+, but they weren't timely on it, and so all of a sudden we have a backlog. We noticed it and said, you guys, we're getting close to the application deadline, and all the orientations are going to be over, and you've got this like a group of over 100 students sitting there that weren't getting admitted. Called a meeting with the Dean of Enrollment Management, the Dean of Undergraduate Studies. Within a week, there was those students got processed within 1.5 weeks, and then they built a process so that, and now we even have a staff person, it's their job to monitor. Like they took it and put it in somebody's job. You need to monitor to make sure that these get through. So that's how fast change can happen. So when we talk about this team, first I have to say, hire well. Hire well. I know we all get in those situations where somebody knows somebody and they're going to apply, or I was a trailing spouse, so I know they made room for me at the institution as a trailing spouse. But do your best to hire well when you get this opportunity to hire a team. And when I say hire well, Danny was my first hire on this hire well, and she is our coordinator. This group is like what keeps things running, and she's what keeps that group running, okay? She's the person, they're peers, they're all coordinators at this point. I'm trying to get this gal into something else, but they're all coordinators right now, but she's the one who makes sure that they meet. She's the one that makes sure that their data's getting collected. She is the coordinator within this team of coordinators. And what she does is she is at orientation. She's at the transfer Tuesdays when they're being recruited. She's at the transfer orientations. She's the person, like there's a face, her face is on the website, that if they call us up or we reach out to them and say, so-and-so in the X office told me I have to go here, 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 and here. Anybody got that scenario where a student calls and says, I've been told to go to 5 different offices. Well, can you tell me who told you? No. So she's the person that it stops with us. Like if somebody comes here, Danny gets a hold of them, and we're in our one-stop area. So if it's a financial aid, she gets up and she walks them across, and she stands in front of financial aid and says, can we help John here today? And it happens. And then if John needs to go to the registrar, she'll walk or send one of our mentors to take him down to the registrar. Or if they need to build a plan of action, okay, well, you need to go to your doctor to get your immunizations. Here's what you can do. Or you can go get your blood drawn. Like we call it concierge service. She takes them from start to finish. And then she's also responsible, which isn't a part of today's program, but getting them engaged on campus. But we've got some really neat data that I'm going to call it data coming out of this. Our Tau Sigma, when she started Tau Sigma a year ago, or revamped it because it had gone dormant for a while, you had in the first year 20...
Before I got here, there were about 10 students.
10 students.
When I started, there was 39, and as of last week, we had 79.
For this year.
And so, that's a great goal to already have accomplished in the 1 year, and hopefully it'll keep doubling as we increase.
Well, and I think the reason that's happening is because the first year they didn't know Danny when she sent out these invitations to join Tau Sigma. Who is this person? Now they know Danny, so this is somebody that I want to be around. And so I really think that we'll find that that's going to drive our numbers, that the invitation is now connected to somebody they know. Okay, so our transfer advising coordinator, she does pre-admission advising. She advises the students that we have the LINK program, which is similar to the other Connect pathway programs, that if you join early in your career at your state college or community college, you get that, and you complete the AA, you get the automatic admission to the state the university. So she does that pre-admission, and she also does the transitional into orientation. And some of what she works really hard to do is getting students on the front end when they've been accepted. If they want to change their major, reaching out to them and getting that change of major to happen prior to orientation. Like we used to have so many problems on the orientation side of students getting to orientation and being undecided still as a transfer student, which is not really a good thing at our institution because you can't get really good advising if you aren't in a declared major, or you can't get the advising you need. We still have good advisors, but the advising you need. And also, our orientations are set up by your college, and if you don't have the right major, we may or may not get you into a college that day, and then that delays your registration. So she works really hard to get those students ready to be where they need to be on their orientation day. And actually, Danny is the student services coordinator. I said the admissions coordinator. So we have an admissions coordinator that was already a position in admissions. They moved him into our center, and she is the one who goes out and meets with students, and students come in and meet with her about the admission process. And then Danny's the direct report to me. The pre-admission advisor, she reports to the Dean of Undergraduate Studies. So that gives her a little bit of clout with other advisors because she does report directly to the dean, and he doesn't have that many direct reports. But on a day-to-day basis, her office is right outside my office, and I supervise her on a day-to-day basis. And so if you see the chart here, I've got under me, we've got the admissions, the undergraduate studies, and well, Dan, I'm looking at the third one, admissions. You can see where they report up to. But we all cooperate together. Even though the admissions person reports to the associate director in admissions, I spend quite a bit of time with her, guiding her and supporting her, and it works. And I know some people a lot of it's right now kind of like having good genes. We got good leadership, so we kind of have good genes right now, but it can happen in other situations too. And so quickly about this team, Danny's going to talk about their process of handing off during reports and things like that. But one way that you can get a picture, if a student comes in to talk to Dana, who's the admissions person, and they start asking questions about the curriculum that gets deeper. Dana's cross-trained to, advise to a point. They're all cross-trained to a point. But if Dana gets to a point and they start asking too much, she said, let's focus on the application process. And as soon as I'm done here, I'm going to hand you off to Christiana. Christiana can start immediately going that deeper dive and answering those advising questions. If Chris starts feeling that there's other barriers here, financial aid, maybe homelessness, other kind of things going on, she'll be able to see, let's focus on your classes right now, and as soon as we're done here, I'm going to take you over to Danny, and Danny's going to get her connected to the resources that she needs. Now, I know some people can do all of that in one person, and if they didn't have other roles, maybe that would make sense. But they all have very unique roles in the enrollment management process too. But that's just how those handoffs happen in an individual situation. And then if somebody's out of the office, they have enough cross-training that if a student walks in and the pre-admission advisor is not available, somebody can see that student and that student can be heard. So it's not like, well, you have to come back. Somebody will be enough of an experience, and the follow-up will be ready that that student doesn't leave feeling like they've been bounced around. And so deliver, I'm going to turn it over to Danny to talk about deliver, but so that design, you've seen our design, so how does it go into action on that scaled up level of we orient over 10,000 students and parents in a year. And so that's a lot of folks, both freshmen and transfer. So how does that process work?
So as Karen mentioned, she did a overview of how our team works together. So we do work hand in hand. I don't think there's a time where we're not working together simultaneously on a project. And so in the enrollment process, what was really important before we started implementing kind of a set process, if you may, I'll say that again, we needed to look at our dynamics. How are we working together? How was the recruiter working with the advisor, working with me with the orientation space as well, and then also eventually getting to that crisis management? How are we doing this together? And so in order to really develop that relationship and that connection between us, we started out by having a retreat initially once our full team was on board. So we had an initial retreat to really talk about how are we going to work together and do this handoff process that Karen was mentioning. So we were fortunate that we had time to really talk it out together. And then after that, we really put some practices in place where we connect with each other through Skype. If one of us has a question while working with a student that only the other person could answer, or they don't have time to grab something that they need, we work really heavily in to make sure that a student doesn't leave our office without all of their issues that we can resolve together. And if there's something that we can't, we make sure that we follow up. And so what this really built into was then creating this onboarding process, which is the crux of why you all are here, this enrollment management process. And so the way I want to define first what that means, because we tell our students to be all done. That's how they complete their onboarding process. And what we mean by that is to be all done, you'll be successful before coming to start your classes in whatever semester that is, because we do orient all year. There's maybe 2 months here and there that we're not orienting, but otherwise we are. And so we want them to make sure that they're all done. And there's a list up here of items that they need to complete. This isn't exhaustive. There are still some that we didn't have up here. But the priority ones that I'm going to just briefly touch on are the ones, the tuition deposit that Karen already reviewed. There's a hold on the student's account. They can't register for orientation until they pay that tuition deposit. They can't register for classes until they attend orientation, because they do it at orientation with their advisor in their college. But they can't register for classes if they haven't submitted their immunization documents. So there's a lot of things that we noticed students were hitting these barriers and not knowing why they couldn't do the next step. They were confused, and we did notice that. And so to streamline this, we've implemented a few things. One of them is that we have an OWL Done portal. That's what we call it. It's an onboarding portal that students log into, and they see all of these items that they need to complete. This was implemented for transfer students actually this year. We opened it in the fall. And so this allows a student to log on and see all of the items they complete, but in the time being, we didn't have that when we started. So we needed to be those people that were telling them what to do and how to complete items.
So, and in this portal, they not only can see it, like it will tell that they can access where to go do the task. So instead of having to go to this website to do housing, go to this website to go to orientation, our IT built this portal that everything's right there, and when a task is completed, it tells them that it's completed. So it's very connected. And
that's homegrown?
Homegrown, yeah. Everything's pulling from Banner, Visual Zen, our data warehouse people. What happened was we got all our stakeholders together who were tired of coming to meetings and having different data because people pulled it in different ways, and we built this Uber report. It's this huge Uber report that has everybody's needs in it, and it's accessible to the folks who need access to it, and it's a miracle what you can do with this data. And that pulls, it feeds the system.
And so with this portal, we have seen students have more ease through it. But before it was implemented, we were those people. We were the portal for them. And so what we've realized is in order to streamline this process, there has to be a lot of things in place. We needed to be reporting. We needed to see where were our students at. This report that Karen was just mentioning, that is something that we use daily. And I'll show you an example in just a moment of how we use that data. But we use that to see where our students are weekly. So if there is a student who tuition deposited on a Monday, we want them registered for orientation by Friday. So if they didn't tuition deposited and by Wednesday they hadn't registered for orientation, believe me, they're getting a phone call from us and they're going to be registered for orientation because we want to make sure that not a day goes by that they're losing time ultimately. And then with the reports, we needed to make sure that we had Tailor communication messages. I'll show you again in two slides of what that looks like. But every student needed individual communication. I've heard a couple presentations today talking about personalization with transfer students. They need to feel connected. So we needed to make sure that depending on what group we were contacting, they knew exactly what that next step was. So if a group was getting contacted because they didn't pay their tuition deposit, how do I pay my tuition deposit? What do I do after that? So we had very, specific communication for these facets. And then, like I mentioned, the Al-Done portal, and then our orientation model, which is also based on appreciative advising too. So like Karen said, we kind of live and breathe this advising model, and I'll show you a brief overview of our orientation model, and I apologize, we won't have enough time to go fully in depth on that, but if you want more information, we can get that for you. So I was talking about those reports, and on the next slide, I'll show you more of what that report looks like. But I want to give you an idea of why we're pulling these numbers. So we pull numbers of where our students are when it comes to tuition deposit, orientation reservations, immunization status, if they're registered for classes, if they're not registered for classes, you name it, we pull it. And what happens with this report is I tally all these numbers, I see where they're at, and then I send it to our team. And from there, we have a coordinated communication process in place now that each of these groups that I have listed, it's really hard to read, I know that, but each of these groups that we pull, they either get an email, a personalized phone call, or we realize that our numbers are low in an area and we need to reach out to another office. So I put up here informed communication with the Office of Admissions. So what we see sometimes when we pull this is that our tuition deposit numbers are low. How can we bump that up? We get connected with the Office of Admissions, and we put in plan through their office a phone call campaign. And that, they have a big enough staff that they're able to call these students immediately and get them tuition deposited. And then we notice by the next week that number has significantly increased. So we do methods like that. And even on this one, for example, I even wrote for one of them, our A report, which I'll explain in a moment, that a call campaign is going to start on Wednesday. So we put these things, they change weekly. There's not something that's always easy. Some days we notice that our immunization holds, our numbers are extremely high, and we have an orientation in 2 days. How are these students going to get advised? If they have the hold, we call them. Hand in hand. And sometimes it's me calling them, sometimes it's Karen, sometimes it's our entire office because they're not coming to orientation with that hold if we can prevent it. So what do these reports look like and why are we just talking about reports left and right? So I've only pulled a few. This is just a few of the reports that I pull. And I know it's a lot of words on there and I apologize for that. I just wanted to give you guys the opportunity to really see what it looks like. So every Monday, ultimately, I pull upwards of I would say at least 10 reports, and they're multifaceted. So the one that we talk heavily about is the one that we've talked about quite often, this tuition deposit, because it's a big hurdle that they have to get over. So that A report that we call, which the names are irrelevant to the actual reports, we just needed a system in place, and alphabet seemed easy. So the A report is pulled every Monday, and as you can see, there's two facets to it. So one report that I pull is students who have not deposited and need to, and students who have deposited but haven't signed up for orientation. Now, in those reports, 2 more reports are pulled, because we also need to figure out what type of transfer student are we talking about, right? So we have 2 different types of transfer students that we work with, and many of you probably do some type of delineation as well. We have lower level transfers, which are 12 to 29 credit hours, and we have 30 plus, which are our upper level transfer students. The reason that we have to make sure we do this at every step of the way is because our lower level transfer students attend freshman orientation, first year orientation. So we can't send them an email that says you need to sign up for transfer orientation, because they can't. So we have to be very intentional with how we're pulling the reports. And so as you can see, we pull those, and then students are sent emails and receive a follow-up phone call by the middle of the week. So that's that example. The other one I want to mention briefly, I've already talked about immunizations, and I don't want to go fully in depth there, but I want to mention this last report down here, which I call the D report, which is our military and veteran students. So the other side of our reporting structure is not just seeing where they are at that week, but also what type of transfer students we have coming in the door. We want to make sure that every single transfer student is getting the resources they need. So, for example, we pull this military and veteran report to see how many transfer students are coming in with veteran status, dependency status, before our orientation program, so that they can connect with our Military and Veteran Success Center and start that process, because they might not know that that resource is available for them. So I pull that report 2 days before every single orientation, including our first year orientations, and that list is sent over to their office, and they contact them before orientation, and then they meet with them on the day of orientation. So, that's just another process that we've implemented. Yes?
Maybe you answer this, but your report appears that once the student is admitted and everything, then you guys kick off like the communication campaign. So
yes.
How does the transition between, is it from the same office? So like, is there a defined different look in your communication?
From admissions to...
Yes, admissions to what y'all, because I was understanding that
yes.
you did it all, but it sounds like you take the student once they're admitted. Right.
So I will actually say that's a great question, because our communications, we have a few that come out of the Office of Admissions, but what we've learned recently is that we're now on a point where we are doing those. So admissions is really only sending the "you've been admitted" communications to the student, and then we kind of step in and send those emails to the tuition deposited. So in terms of the email look, they all look very similar. They look like they're coming from us. And then if they do come from the Office of Admissions, what we've actually worked with them on in the past, and we're going to continue, is to put our information in there so they can connect with us.
Students don't seem to be confused with the pass, or they don't notice it.
So the way we divide the work, admissions is technically responsible for the student up into getting them tuition deposited, okay? And then at tuition deposit orientation, and TSS is a unit kind of connected to orientation, we work hand in glove. We picked them up at tuition deposited, but we just implemented this tuition deposit like a year ago, and so students weren't used to it. So we've had to move further. TSS has had to move further upstream, but remember, we have admissions in our office. So even though we're TSS, we're a subset of admissions, a subset of orientation. We've had to help admissions get that to happen, because their processes weren't it had enough resources, capacity to hammer these students about this new tuition deposit. So what we end up doing is we monitor, we do the basic communications with them from TSS, and when we get to a block where we're like, we've got a problem, they're not tuitioning deposit, then all of a sudden they get something from admissions, and it sometimes kicks them in gear. Like, because we get a really good response from us, because one trick we learned, I heard people say in other sessions, students don't exactly want to be oriented. Well, the orientation sends one communication to the transfer students. Now, all the other ones come from the center, and we send it from the advisor. So the advisor says, hey, your next step is to get advised and registered. They open the email. Guess what? You get advised and registered at orientation. So that's kind of the way we've gotten them to be more responsive to signing up for orientation, because the end goal is to get registered.
And, oh, yes, go.
Is orientation mandatory for counselors?
Yes, orientation is mandatory, and I'll talk about that program in just a moment. But to also further answer your question, we'll actually show you some data that we pulled in the office that shows that students aren't as confused anymore, that it has kind of leveled out, because I think they see us now as this multifaceted team, which has been, it's a good question, because we were worried too that students would see, why am I getting an email from these different folks? But because we've been so intentional with how and when we use different offices, they're pretty responsive. Yeah. Yes.
So do the emails come directly from you guys, or do you have like a transfer services email?
We have a transfer services email, so it's transfer@fau.edu. We wanted to make it as easy as possible, but students do realize that, like when I respond to an email, if I email out from transfer, I respond and I put my tag at the bottom. So students are contacting me back, or they're contacting our advisor back, or they're contacting Dana back. And so we make sure that, again, they realize there's a person behind this process and that it's not an automatic switch.
And all three of them monitor the emails that come in. She's the first line of response, but if she's here, then the other two know that they're now up on deck.
And so what we've been talking about with these past few slides goes back to the handle recommendations that I just want to point out, because one of them is to have that user-friendly admissions and enrollment processes. And that's what we're working towards and that we're trying to create. And so this is just one aspect of the entire overview of reports. And if you're interested at all in learning more about the other ones, again, I would love to talk through them.
Okay, so this is a graph of the enrollment of the orientation orientation sessions the year before we had the center. And so we had a lot more of students who would make a reservation and not show, and because they can reschedule themselves, but they'd make reservations and not show. We would have a lot of underfilled orientation sessions, sporadic. The colleges were always mad at me. You just goes with the territory, right? I have wonderful working relationships, but I work really hard to stay out of trouble with the colleges, because I do have very good colleagues over there. But it was very sporadic. You could see we'd have a lot of students orient, then we'd dip down, and a lot of that had to do with the communication flow, because we didn't have, it was orientation staff doing the communications, which was a 3-person team trying to do a class of 3,600 first-year students and also another 3,500 transfer students. So you can see all these sporadic enrollments. This is a year later when we get the process in place, and this is with our first round of the process. We've refined it even further. You can see that we have a much more straight line attendance at the orientation, not as many gaps from reservation. So Danny, what the blue line is attended, red line is reserved. You can see we've closed that gap some. That dip in the beginning there, that has to do with the start of a term. So there's nothing, that's a downward spike because of just the term starting. Our colleges hated, we implemented, after we visited UCF, an orientation in the first week of classes to be the catch-all one for the folks who didn't get through. And my College of Science just, Dr. Resler, every time she'd see me, Karen, that is such a bad practice. I mean, not saying it was bad practice for all institutions, but a bad practice for students to be getting in so late, like getting into classes. But I'm like, what am I supposed to do? The enrollment management is saying admit, admit, admit. And so I'm not going to have anybody say this student didn't get enrolled because I wouldn't orient them. So just let you know, I'm going to keep orienting them because until somebody tells me to stop. So they're like, ah. So that's that last dot there on the side. So what we were able to do, we didn't put the charts up, but when this last term, because we refined this process even further from these data charts, we were able to eliminate the need for the Tuesday session during the first week of classes because we got everybody in, and the colleges loved us because we were so far ahead of the game, we actually stopped admitting around the time that we said we would stop admitting, which was, I gotta tell you, I mean, if you don't appreciate it, it's kind of like a miracle. We actually stopped admitting. So I hope this gives you a little view of the difference that we feel this process is making in onboarding students in a more, a cleaner, transparent process.
And the orientation program is where we continue to get them prepared for classes. Now, again, like I said, I don't have enough time to talk about the full program, but I do want to kind of just explain our model because it is a flipped model. Our orientation for transfer students is 2 parts. You do an online pre-orientation program, which many other universities have implemented, but ours is a little bit different. I'll explain why in a second. And then you come to the mandatory on-campus orientation program, which is where you meet with your academic advisor. So the way that this works, the online pre-orientation is done through Canvas, which is a platform that they use for their classwork. So it gets them technologically savvy for classes. But this program is focused on the resources available to you. Every single resource imaginable is in this program. I know because I developed it, put all the information in there. There's a lot in there. So it's mainly focused on resources. And what happens is after each module, we call them, they take a quick little quiz, and they have to pass the quiz to make it to the next section. And it tests them on things that we want them to know before they come to orientation. You know, what GPA do you need to keep to maintain, stay above probation, things like that. How do you apply for financial aid, or what is the registrar, or what is housing, things like that we want to make sure they know about. And we also do mention those specialized populations, international students, military and veteran students, if you need student accessibility services, everything is in there. What's really neat about this is students have access to this their entire first year. We don't kick them out of it. We let them have it on their Canvas. So if there's ever a time that they need to see it, they can go back in. And so they take that, then they come on campus. Now, because we do all of the resources in the pre-orientation, it allowed us more time in our on-campus orientation to do more of that university building and belongingness, as well as that student-to-student connection. Because our program is only 1 day for transfer students, so we don't have a lot of time. So what we've done is we use that Appreciative Advising model to really create an engaging program where students are connecting with their peers. So students sit at tables with their colleges, so other students who are in their major that they're going to have classes with. So they don't know that initially, we tell them eventually, but they make connections immediately. We have them talk to their peers. We do an interactive workshop at orientation where they talk about their dreams and why they're here and what their 2 years or more is going to look like, and they create a plan. So it's really, a great opportunity for us to get them connected to the university. We take them on a tour, the orientation leaders get them really excited to be there, and it's just, we notice that the students are having such a different experience now because we've done this flipped model. In this picture here, I do want to point out, we do invite transfer students to volunteer for the program and help us facilitate it. And so we have about 2 to 3 every session that current transfer students will come and help us engage with the transfer students in the morning. And so they do that disarming, like Karen was mentioning, and talking to students as they're coming in and saying, "Oh, I transferred. Where'd you transfer from?" And they love it. So, and I don't pay them, so that's great. Yes. Yes.
Do you have problems with the online orientation portion with them not completing it or having access to? Because I think of some of our, especially underrepresented students, that they barely have access to apply. So how do you, is that part mandatory as well, and how do you kind of?
Yes, great question. So for those of you who may not heard, the question was, how do we work with different types of populations when it comes to the pre-orientation underrepresented who may not have access to a computer or just accessibility in general? We do manage that as much as we can, I will say that. We have some students who will come to our office and take the program. We have computers that they can pop on. As long as we give them a pair of headphones, they can do it. There's also subtitles and transcripts in there so they don't have to watch the full videos. With that too, if a student doesn't complete it, that's a great question. So they have to complete it. They have to pass it, as we say, 260 out of 260. Again, the numbers doesn't really mean anything. It's just the number we came up with. If they don't complete it, yes. If they come to orientation and they haven't completed this program, we won't prevent them from registering for classes on that day. But that hold goes back on their account the next day. So if they don't complete it by the first week of ad drop, we're getting phone calls. Why can't I sign up for classes? Why can't I change my schedule? You didn't finish your pre-orientation. You need to go in and finish it. And that has actually lessened, I will say, this past year. We've noticed less students are calling us because they are completing it on time because the communications are working. But that was a great question. Yes.
Another question about Canvas. I mean, we use Canvas, but our students don't have access to Canvas until they're actually enrolled. So is there a special way that you work with IT or?
We manually put them in. Once they have an FAU email, they're able to access it. So for us, they just need to have their email address, and we can put them in. I don't know. There's no. We don't prevent them. Yeah, we don't have that policy, I guess, in place with our Canvas contract. I don't know if that's.
Once they're admitted and they have a Z number, they can access it. That's our number system instead of Social Security. We call them Z numbers.
So I'm not sure.
It might be because the orientation isn't tied to a particular term.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
As to why they can access it before the term starts.
Because when we publish this, yeah. This course is publishable all year. So yes, that's a great question, but I'm not sure. I would need to talk to our Canvas folks.
Yeah, I'm glad we don't have that problem.
You may want to check with your IT folks to see if you can kind of come up with a class that you can give students access to, because sometimes it's really just a matter of having something for them to access to be able to get to it.
That sounds probably like what's happening.
Yeah.
Yes.
How early does the pre-orientation process open up for students, and what is their completion time? How long does it take them to complete this pre-orientation?
Good question. So the pre-orientation program opens, so for the spring, it will open on March 20th, mainly because I need a couple months to get the edits together. So we start our orientations in April. So on March 20th, for summer sessions, yes. So the program will be open in time for students to complete it before then. And in the emails that they get when they register for orientation, it explains that. It says, your pre-orientation will be available on this date. You access it this way. When it comes to the fall sessions, it's open, we opened it, I'm trying to think, in October, early October, yes, for spring term.
3 weeks before they can start scheduling for classes. That's the goal.
Right, yes.
As long as they complete it before they come, that's our goal.
And it takes them a couple hours.
Yeah.
Yes, it's a pretty long, they don't have to do it all in one sitting. We tell them to not do it all in one sitting.
Yeah, we encourage them to. And they can try to take a whack at the question and answer the question. You know, you can't make people do everything in their life. Yes.
How many in-house orientations do you have?
We have, over the course of a year, probably 45 transfer sessions and 15 freshman sessions over a course of a full year, not just an academic year, a full year.
Mm-hmm. And they
19 to 19, so I guess.
Yeah. We had to increase when we went from letting them just do a virtual model and have to come to campus. You had to increase the number of sessions because we have caps by colleges, so we had to have more sessions.
And how long are those sessions, the in-house sessions?
What?
They spend the day
It's
with
a day.
us.
Oh, the day.
Yeah, so they spend the morning with us, they get a business break, and then they spend the afternoon with the colleges and advising.
So by the time they leave, they'll have their class.
That is the goal, yeah.
Yes. So I know we're running out of time, so we'll do our best to get through the rest.
Let me show you this next slide. So, since I'm one of the folks who maintain they need to come to campus, and we do have a significant online population, and they're considered our transfer students too, because most of them are finishing degrees. So that's another segment of what we do with online. But for the folks who are brick and mortar and they need to come to campus, we were maintaining that part of this orientation is getting connected to peers, and we also want to get them connected to high impact practices, the internships, mentoring. And so when we I looked at the data after we did this hybrid flip originally, and I was dismayed because we only had, in the summer fall data, 68% of the students saying they felt like they were more connected to their peers. And I'm like, uh-oh, like that's not hitting the mark for what, if this is what I'm maintaining they're supposed to have happening here. And then their intention to participate in high impact practices, and I apologize, it's LEAP if you Google high impact practices, George Koo and his group. 29% were not saying that they were going to, or that they do not plan to do any HIPs while they're here. So then we revamped it,
And we got a little bit of a bump up, but it still wasn't where we wanted to be. I'm like, that's a C. You know, I can't be getting a C on this. In my mind, that's a C. So then Danny took another crack at it, and they started having the students sit together by college. And so then we got to, if we jump over to here, this is probably the strongest implementation of the model. We finally got up to 82.2%, saying that they left orientation feeling more connected to peers. So we finally got a 15% increase in where we were trying to go. And we dropped down to 15.7, saying that they weren't going to participate in a high impact practice. So I'm constantly playing with the model because, again, we're at a B. I don't want to be a B. I want to be an A. So, but just want to demonstrate, because this is a part of the, if you move forward, the don't settle. Setting that bar, that height, it drives my staff, my associate director of orientation says, Karen, no innovation this year. Like, just we're out with innovation. Can we just run the model? But we're constantly trying to do better. Listening sessions, surveys, conversations with students, evaluating the program. A team, we have our transfer task force. We also have this other phenomenal team that all the units that have to do with onboarding, registrar, financial aid, we meet weekly, every Tuesday, 1 o'clock for the last 3 years. And if there is something that's not going right in the enrollment process, the head of IT is at the table, we fix it. Like, we walk away from that table every week with a plan of how to fix whatever. If all of a sudden we have one student that's having a problem in the portal, they're on it and they're trying to figure out what other students that could be affecting. And this, I could tell people about this A team in a workshop at some point, because this is a phenomenal team. So highlights.
Just quickly, I know we're right on time. This right here is just showing that we are constantly evaluating what we're doing. We pulled numerical numbers to just show the growth in a year. And we look at this and we think, this is great. We're growing. We've already went from seeing 194 students to seeing 300 students. We went from having 70 students come to my programs to 348 students. I mean, that's a huge bump. But we look at it and we think, we're not done. We still have 15,000 students that we're not interacting with. How do we keep growing? So yes, we celebrate the little wins, but we also continually strive for more.
These are reported as our KPIs, our key performance indicators. And so each unit within the center has KPIs that we are held accountable for reporting these out.
So just to, as we're coming to an end, I do want to point out that in our office, onboarding doesn't stop when they come to orientation. They don't get away from me that easily. And so we have some programs that we do run throughout the year. And these are things that we are constantly evolving and changing. There's certain programs I learned weren't working and certain that I saw were working. And so these are just some points of pride. We have a collaboration with Campus Recreation. They host outdoor adventures for transfer students. We do an Introduction to Leadership course specifically for transfer students. They can't even enroll for it unless they're a transfer student. We have transfer organization. We have a Tau Sigma organization. We work with our iCommute office to create parking lot programs that we call them. And then we're also planning a transfer appreciation week that occurs on the Boca campus, and then it also occurs on our Broward campuses and our Jupiter campuses. So we're expanding across those 6 campuses that I mentioned. So that's just a couple points of pride, just to show you what we're doing out beyond the enrollment aspect. So that's all we have. I know that was a lot.